All right, this is a session on moving to Backdrop CMS. I am Jen Lampton, and I'm going to do a quick intro of myself. I am a web developer. I'm an independent contractor, so I tend to work on small teams. I do a lot of government, nonprofit, small business stuff, not very much enterprise stuff anymore, although I used to do that back when I worked for a digital agency. And my focus has primarily been on trying to get these smaller groups comprehensive website functionality without costing them an arm and a leg. So my experience was primarily with Drupal. I started using Drupal in 2005 or 2006, quite a while ago. I was really involved in core development for a while. I was the initiative lead to try and get Twig into Drupal 8 most recently. And then after that, I started to feel like Drupal was no longer a great fit for the people I was trying to serve. And so I started working on Backdrop, which is Drupal with all the Drupal 7 with all the features that you want it to have, but shifted more towards the needs of these people that need more functionality on less of a budget. So it's sort of catered to less of the developer audience, more of the we're going to hire someone to do that for us as an intern sort of audience. I am currently in the process of moving many of my clients to Backdrop CMS, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that process today. Luke, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, it won't be quite that long, I don't think, but I am Luke McCormick. I live in San Ramon, California. I'm a web marketing professional that uses a variety of platforms, but most particularly Drupal and Backdrop. I have spent most of my career working with large corporate clients in very large projects, but what always appealed to me about Drupal is its accessibility, and I'm excited about Backdrop because from my perspective, Backdrop takes the things I like the best about Drupal and focuses on them, and I am very optimistic about that trend continuing and great things coming in the future.
Thank you. So we wanted to do a quick poll and try and figure out who was listening to this session, but it looks like we don't quite have the technology to do that. So just say if you are comfortable typing into the chat or into anywhere we can hear it. If you are currently thinking about moving a website, changing platforms, if you have a website already in Drupal, if you have a website already in WordPress, if you're currently using another CMS, if you could let us know. We've got some slides at the end and a demo that we think will be valuable to you, but because Luke and I are coming primarily from the Drupal world, we are going to be talking mostly about comparing Backdrop to Drupal. So I am going to carry on, assuming we don't know who you are, but we're gonna come back to that a little later. So Backdrop is a free open source content management system, much like Drupal. It is specifically intended to help people build websites for businesses and nonprofits. So this is very focused on people doing the building. It is primarily intended to do websites as opposed to web applications or APIs. And it is specifically focused on nonprofits and small to medium-sized businesses. So we're shooting for not the enterprise here. And one main reason for that is that the enterprise already has a fantastic CMS with Drupal 8, and we are not trying to compete against that. Backdrop is also a Drupal fork. And I don't know, Luke, if you want to add anything on vision there, but I just wanted to explain really quickly what a fork is for people who may not be fluent with the open source language. Essentially what we did is we took Drupal 7 and renamed it and released it as something else. So it's exactly the same software, but we changed the name. And we did that because after taking the software, we made a bunch of changes to it that weren't on the roadmap for Drupal itself. So Drupal went one direction and we went in a different direction. So it's sort of, you get to a fork in the road and you decide to go two different paths. That's what happened to this software. So Backdrop was once Drupal It's very similar to Drupal in a lot of ways because of that, but it has a different focus and different set of priorities now.
I think it's important to note that many of the technologies that were created for Drupal from the very initial version up through Drupal 7 were branched away. Drupal 8 took an enterprise direction and adopted a variety of industrial strength, well-proven technologies that are great for building large systems, and made a choice, made several choices to go for sort of the large industrial scale capabilities at the cost of a certain amount of simplicity and conciseness, and that the backdrop actually, with Drupal is when they stop supporting Drupal 7, which is coming up soon, will no longer be using those technologies. The only place those technologies will be used actively are in Backdrop. Many of those technologies are contained and supported and will continue to grow and evolve within the Backdrop project, which is one of the things that excites me most about it.
Yeah, and Drupal's been around for a long time. It's 10 years of solid development. A whole bunch of people put a lot of time and effort into all of the modules and themes that are out there for Drupal. And come a year and a bit from now, all of that information would be lost because there's newer versions of it that are evolving for Drupal 8. But all of that old technology will still work on the Backdrop platform with very little modifications. So we are sort of in a way preserving all of the work that's already been done in the past and carrying it forward, which is exciting. So Drupal 7 is old software. So if you're gonna create a fork of 10-year-old software, you have to do some cleanup on it. There are a lot of people who still build new sites today on Drupal 7, and there's a lot of work you have to do to just sort of make it a platform that people would expect today from a modern CMS. So Backdrop is starting from a step slightly forward from where Drupal 7 was in order to make the initial setup as simple as possible. That means that we are including a whole bunch of features that you'll also find in Drupal 8. There are a bunch of things that you couldn't live without in a modern CMS. Those are now in Backdrop. And we've also taken a whole bunch of the most popular features from Drupal 7 contributed modules and included those in core too. So we're trying to make a more feature complete product right out of the gate. And then we've added a whole bunch of other significant improvements. Some of them went in before we released Backdrop. Some of them have been added since then based on what people using it are finding. And we're hoping to show you some of those today. So in terms of some of the top core features in Drupal 8, one of the things people fought with a lot in Drupal 7 is just trying to make it work on phones and tablets. And that's because when it was first released, we did not anticipate the primary way people interact with websites is via a phone. A lot happens in 10 years. So Backdrop uses HTML5. It's mobile first. It's responsive out of the box. All of the features that we've added to it, we've made sure are touch friendly and responsive. We've also included a rich text editor, as does Drupal 8. People expect to be able to type in article content and click buttons to format it how they want. We've used the same rich text editor that's in Drupal 8, so there's a lot of shared benefits happening there too. And we took views, which is the top contributed module for Drupal 7, and CTools, which is the module it depends on, and those are also in core and Backdrop as they are in Drupal 8. The point in time at which we forked Backdrop was actually right after the configuration management system went in, because we thought that would be the #1 killer feature that Backdrop needed to contain. It was something that everybody was very excited about. It was something that lots of people who've been doing web development and lots of different platforms have struggled with. This problem of being able to deploy a configuration change to a production website without threatening the integrity of the content there has been around since database-driven websites have been around, and having a solution for that in core was key. So we have a configuration management system in Backdrop. We've also added a ton of additional field types, just like Drupal 8 has. We added the most popular ones from the top 100 contrib modules of Drupal 7. So date, email, link. There's a bunch of other modules in Backdrop as well, but we've got sort of the main ones that Drupal 8 has also. In terms of what we took from Drupal 7, we have a lot of modules that are very common for people to use that did not make it into Drupal 8 core. So things like token and path auto, which allow you to create human readable URLs for your content automatically. Those two projects got merged into system modules in Backdrop. So path auto is just part of path module. We added redirect module, which is a module that will automatically set up redirects should your paths change. That came the version after we added automatic path aliasing, because if we're going to automatically change your path, we better automatically redirect as well to not lose traffic or break links on the internet. And then we included a bunch of top modules from Contrib that we thought would add a great set of features. So admin menu adds a administration bar across the top of every page of your site. We rewrote that and put it in core. Panels, this is a module that solves the layouts problem. We rewrote the user interface for that and put it in core. If you're interested in seeing the layout system, I highly recommend Tim's talk, The Hidden Power of Layouts, which we just watched here at CMS Philly. It was really great. And then there's a bunch of other stuff that we added to Backdrop specifically for the content editing experience. So we looked at features that were included in WordPress and sort of wanted to copy those. Things like automatically being able to schedule your posts to go live in the future, being able to close comments automatically, being able to link to existing content. There were 68 additional contributed modules that aren't listed here. And there's a page on backdropcms.org that lists them all that include comparable functionality in Backdrop core. So some of the modules like redirect are just put in just like a module and turn on, turn off, just like you did in Drupal 7. And some of the other ones like token and path auto were merged into existing systems where they didn't need to be a module on their own. Some of them, like panels, remain a separate module, but they're a rewrite of what was there before. So we have a completely new user interface, but the same set of functionality. So there's different ways. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to highlight the 68 more modules that's included in here, because I think it's easy to forget about the significance of that for us who have been in Backdrop for as long as we have. That in order to make a Drupal 7 system really usable, just as you installed it, the first thing you do is you download like 20 or 30 modules to do all the little things that had become kind of an important part of the web building experience. And that one of the key advantages of Backdrop over Drupal 7 is that these things are included, and at the same time that they're included, it's not just that they're conveniently there, but they're debugged, they're tested with every release, they work with each other, they're going to be supported indefinitely. It's a solid system that you can build usable, ready to go websites without loading anything else. You can just download core and get to work, which is not really the case with Drupal 7 or realistically with WordPress or lots of other things. Most systems that you build websites with come as a very like bare bones kind of environment that you have to do a lot of customization before you even get started. Whereas Backdrop's really, you're ready to go from that initial install.
Yeah. And a lot of those modules are little tiny ones that we felt were user experience improvements in a way that if 80% of people who had this feature used it, that's something that belonged in core. So we have sort of an 80% rule in terms of choosing those features. But there were a whole lot of contrib modules in Drupal 7 because a lot of people needed those features. And so we put in a whole bunch of little tiny ones. There's obviously some very large ones like panels. Yeah, I think it feels like a complete package, but we are obviously continuing to add new features every 4 months. And as people identify new needs, new modules from Drupal 7 will probably also be included. There's a bunch of other things we're focused on too that aren't just including features. We are focused on making the complexity of this system lower. So one of the biggest complaints about Drupal 7 is that the learning curve was too high. Drupal 8 went a little bit farther in that same direction, where the learning curve for Drupal 8 is still higher than it was for Drupal 7. Some of that is going to be eased by people who already have a baseline understanding of some of these systems, but Drupal 7 worked really well for people who weren't necessarily web developers before they started using it. And so we took that goal and said, how do we empower more of these people who want to build websites to just be able to log into a system and do it without understanding programming, without understanding website architecture, just to be able to click things around and snap them together. But at the same time, we're not creating a Squarespace competitor. We are not building a tool that's super simple all the way through. We want this to be a system that you can use to build a really complex database of relational information. So trying to take a really powerful, complex tool and have easy to use interface is very hard. So we've started focusing primarily on user experience improvements, decreasing complexity and architecture. And by doing those things, we've also been able to make the product faster. So Backdrop out of the box will render pages faster than Drupal 7. It includes a whole bunch of additional features. If you take a Drupal 7 site and add all those modules to it, it is significantly slower than a Backdrop site would be today. And because we want Backdrop to be able to run on shared hosting, we're also constantly looking at ways we can make it faster. So we've got sort of that as one of our priorities of making it easier to use, less complicated, and faster every release. All right, so how do you make complex tasks simple? It's really hard. We have a lot of debates around terminology and cleaning up interfaces. Pretty much every release, whether it's a bug fix release or a minor release, there's always improvements going in to make it faster to accomplish simple and complex tasks. Backdrop itself performs really well. We have changed the way pages render, so we no longer have a giant page array that sort of renders inside out. We now render the page outside in with the new layout system. Just this latest release, we've merged in entity cache, which is something that's also in Drupal 8. And we have a background fetch process for page cache, which also prevents the first time slow page load problem. So just continuing to look at ways to make the product faster, we've been able to put in a bunch of known solutions from Drupal 7 and a bunch of new ones as well for Backdrop. Making Backdrop easy. This is something that is also really important as people evaluate new software. We want them to be able to create content easily. We want them to be able to feel that the administrative interface for those more complicated tasks is still approachable. So one thing I wanted to point out is that since Backdrop was released, we've put in 558 user experience improvements. A lot of these just include making the terminology consistent from one interface to the other. In Backdrop, when you click link that says edit, that content's getting saved in the database. And if you click link that says configure, that content's getting saved in configuration files. So just making those kind of consistency changes across the entire interface makes the product much easier to understand. And because of these little changes we've made, we've gotten feedback from people who've moved to Backdrop from both Drupal and WordPress that their editors and administrators are finding it easier to use. So that's great, we're moving in the right direction, but obviously we have a lot farther to go because we started from Drupal, so we're still working on adding interface improvements. So why would you want to move from Backdrop to Drupal or move to Backdrop from Drupal? If you have administrators that do a lot of their own work on the site as opposed to having a development team do it, having a cleaner user interface for them means they're likely to make fewer mistakes and be able to do more on their own. So sort of empowering your administrators to do more by having a cleaner experience, which is really great. If you have a Drupal 7 website and you're happy with it, but you're worried about the end of life approaching, moving to Backdrop might be a good option because it will be really familiar to anyone who used the Drupal 7 site. And it will be a step hopefully up in terms of user experience, and affordability. It should become more affordable than your Drupal 7 site was to maintain. If you really like all of the features you have on your Drupal 7 site and you want and you don't want a different website. You want the exact same website you have. You're happy with it. You want all the same features. It's really easy to keep all of that, whether it's functionality that you had custom coded or whether it's contributed modules. You can have it exactly the same in Backdrop as you had it in Drupal 7. If you want more ongoing improvements to your software, Backdrop is something that obviously we have been doing it for 5 years. We're going to keep doing it. Every 4 months, there's new features that get added. The existing features get refinements, they get usability improvements, they get translation improvements. This is not a piece of software that's going to be standing still. If you chose to stay on Drupal 7 after end of life, you would obviously get exactly the same website you have now, which is great. But you're not going to be getting those kind of continuing improvements for free as part of your website. And if you don't want to rebuild or migrate your website to a different platform, Backdrop also includes a very easy upgrade path, which we will demonstrate at the end.
All right, I want to highlight actually. This is presented as the carrot side of the reasons why you want to move, but there's kind of the stick side of that too, in that Drupal 7 is not going to be officially supported anymore, and so there's facilities being put in place to not completely abandon the Drupal 7 user base in terms of ongoing security support and things like that. But really, the heavy flow, the vast proportion of the development work and enhancements are not going to be going towards Drupal 7 anymore. However, they will be in Backdrop. So the kind of like core of why we're suggesting that you should come to Backdrop is because all this stuff is staying alive. It is fully supported, it is fully embraced, it is fully loved, and will be continuing into the future, you know, with a lot of strength.
Yeah, that's a good point. Backdrop is built and is worked on today by people who really love Drupal. They really love Drupal 7. They really love Drupal before that. And they're carrying forward that passion for the software that, you know, changes lives into the future. So keeping that in mind too, if you love Drupal, if you love Drupal 7, Backdrop might be a good choice for you also. All right, so if you're coming from WordPress, some of the same reasons you might want to move to Backdrop. If you want a better administrator experience, you might want to choose a CMS, a more comprehensive CMS, and Backdrop could be a good choice. If you feel at all limited by what your WordPress site can do, WordPress is a really powerful tool. It is very good at what it does, which is being a blog engine. But sometimes when you try and expand it to be more of a CMS, it starts to get a little bit brittle. And if you feel like you need more of that CMS functionality and you're hitting some of the walls of what WordPress is really good at, expanding to something that has a more complex underlying architecture will give you more flexibility. A lot of times in WordPress, you will buy a plugin and it'll work great for a few years after you have it, and then it becomes unsupported. Now you have some software you don't have anyone maintaining. It might not continue to work for you, and that can be really frustrating. If you're hoping for a richer content experience, so better use of fields on your content, a better way to organize it using taxonomy, a better way to search it or query it using tools like views, Backdrop has all of those things built in and might be a nice step forward in that direction. Or if you are a coder and you're looking for a richer API, or you have your own custom needs and you're a little bit limited by what WordPress will give you in that sense, Backdrop has a very modular API where you can integrate with almost every part of the process.
Yeah, I'd like to actually throw in a little color around the information architecture capabilities that the Drupal Backdrop model gives you over WordPress. Whereas in WordPress, if you know we're talking about transition from that, you have basically two content types that come out of the box, each which has two fields. They've got a title and a body and a certain amount of metadata. Whereas the Drupal Backdrop model has it actually comes out of the box with about the same kind of things, but it's inherently scalable. You can add as many content types as you like. You can make them very complex. You have a functional experience that gives you the end use that the people are used to, who design their own SQL database tables and can set up a very complicated schema that exactly, or very closely maps to the data that you have in the real world, but without the vast amount of complexity that usually entails. Like you get that kind of power at a tiny fraction of the effort. It's all done within the interface, so it's reliable. It doesn't break. You don't have your system falling apart because there's a semicolon out of place. You can do very, very powerful things that you can configure very quickly and very reliably. And
Uh-oh, did we lose you? I think we lost Luke.
Oh, yeah, he disappeared now. He's gone.
All right. Well, I'm curious to
could
know what
see-
came after the and.
I
But
could see him, and he's totally gone now. So
yeah, okay. Well, we'll carry on and hopefully he'll come back. All
that
right.
it's otherwise have to.
Oh,
I
are you
don't see you,
back?
Jen. I'm here. I don't see you.
Uh-oh, I'm still here.
Did my connection go down? Did no one's
Yeah,
hear that?
we lost you there for a minute.
Oh no.
We got all the way up to the and then it cut off perfectly after the and.
It probably wasn't important anyway.
All right. We'll move on to moving content.
All right.
So if you do decide to move to Backdrop and you have your content in a different place, there's lots of different ways that you can move that content into Backdrop. So we're going to cover a couple of those. One of them would be if you have your data in a spreadsheet or a CSV file, you can get that data into Backdrop. You can do it using the feeds module. The feeds module also works really well with data feeds, so XML or RSS feeds. Anything JSON feeds, anything you can get an existing website to spit out can be used to ingest into Backdrop. If you have a different database that's containing all of your information, you might be interested in connecting that directly to your Backdrop site and using Migrate module. And then we have a couple of examples of WordPress, Drupal, and then any other place you might want to start your data from. So if we start with the feeds module, specifically for CSV data, there's a really great tool that lets you upload your CSV file and then map by column to where you want that data stored in your Backdrop site. So if you have, for example, blog posts, you'll be able to choose the column that contains the content of the body field, the column that contains the author information, the column that contains any photos attached, and map them to the correct place in your site. Once you've done that mapping, it'll parse through the whole CSV file and pull in all of your data, which is great. Very similar, using the feeds module to pull in data from a data feed. It's the same thing where you'll need to set up the mapping between the different parts of the feed and the different parts of your Backdrop site. But once you have that mapping set up, the system will just go through and update all of the information in your Backdrop site based on its origin. And this can also be really useful if you need to import this data over and over again, or if the source data is still changing. The feeds module can use a unique identifier to tell if a piece of content has changed and pull in only updates, which is really handy. So I highly recommend using feeds module. It's one of my favorites. It works great with Drupal, and now it also works for Backdrop. If you are connecting to another database, you can use the Migrate module. The Migrate module it is intended more for developers, so there's a lot of code writing involved. The feeds module is intended more for end users, so there's more button clicking involved. Using the Migrate module, you can connect to another database and you can pull data directly out of one database and insert it into another one. So you have to have a little bit more understanding of the database schema, or at least the object organization in the code on how to save things in the right place. But some people really love using the Migrate module because it will work with any other database. I actually added a slide in here. If your data is coming from anywhere in the world, you do have the opportunity to use humans to move that data. A lot of the solutions we usually go to in the technology world involve technology, but I would like to point out that right now there are a whole bunch of people who aren't working their normal jobs, who are sitting at home. Some of them need side jobs or looking for income, and copying and pasting is a great way to keep them busy. Sometimes it's really affordable. Depending on how much data you have, you might actually save money by hiring someone to copy and paste your blog posts rather than trying to use something like Migrate module to write some code to pull it over for you. So just want to point that out. Sometimes copying and pasting is a realistic solution. If you're coming from WordPress, there is a WordPress Import module for Backdrop. So WordPress is, as Luke said, sort of a minified version of what you can get from Drupal or Backdrop. You get blog posts, they have a title, they have a body, sometimes they have a taxonomy, they have user information. All of that stuff we also have in Backdrop and Drupal. And if you're moving from WordPress to Backdrop, you can use the WordPress Import module to pull all of that standard data from WordPress over into your Backdrop site. Jeff, who's one of our core committers, wrote this or worked on this module, I think about a year ago, and used it to move a couple of his sites over. So it theoretically will work, but has not been proven successful recently. So it's out there. I think with a little love, you can get your WordPress content into Backdrop pretty easily in a straightforward way. There's also a user interface. So if you're coming from Drupal 7, you can use the built-in upgrade path. So Backdrop assumes that it is the next version of Drupal and updates in the same way that Drupal 6 updated to Drupal 7 or Drupal 5 updated to Drupal 6. And because everything is really, really similar between the two, the process of making that upgrade is fairly quick and painless. We are going to do a demo.
Okay,
So,
I want to throw in something actually.
Sure.
To emphasize that last point about the Drupal 7 to Backdrop migration versus the Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 migration, because I have recently experienced trying both, and surprisingly, maybe to those on the outside, there are substantial pieces of Drupal that migrate to Backdrop much easier than they do to Drupal 8. In particular, views, which are heavily used in many Drupal sites, don't migrate at all to Drupal 8. You have to recreate them, whereas they migrate wonderfully into Backdrop. And so that if you've got a built-up Drupal 7 site with lots of views, you should explore those two options as you make your decisions.
Thanks. So what we're going to do right now is upgrade stonevalleyfarm.com, which is a website that I built maybe 6 years ago or something, from Drupal to Backdrop. This is today a very simple website. It is mostly brochureware. It's advertising a local farm that raises some fancy pigs. They are intended for dinner, so apologies to vegetarians and vegans out there, but they are very well cared for, loved pigs, local to California, which is where we're from, and apparently they're delicious. So this website, when it was originally built, was an e-commerce website. Since then, this company has grown to the point that they have a distributor that they work with, and so they no longer use the e-commerce component. So the website is now simply brochureware. So Drupal 7 is approaching end of life. This is a perfect candidate for, if it was built today, you might choose something more like WordPress or Squarespace, not WordSpace, although that's a good name for something. And what I wanted to do was demonstrate that because this is already an existing website in Drupal 7, the easiest and most affordable option for them to move forward would be to move to Backdrop. So what I've done is I've taken all of the modules that are on the Drupal 7 site and dropped them into equivalent versions of them into a Backdrop site. I've exported the database from the Drupal 7 site and imported it into an empty database. And what I've done is hooked my Backdrop site up to the Drupal 7 database. And what I'm going to do is run the update script so you can see how it gets changed. So the update script for Backdrop, this, if you've done an update for Drupal, will look very similar. It's the same interface, just slightly updated in terms of visual appearance. You can tell it's Backdrop. There's 211 pending updates in order to move this site from Drupal to Backdrop, which sounds like a lot, but when you actually start the update process, it really only takes a few seconds. So as soon as this is done updating, it'll give me a web page. I am not currently logged in, so I'm going to go to the home page of my site, log in. Once I'm logged in, I will do a configuration sync. So this will take all of the configuration files. Oh man. Okay, hold on everyone. Hey, Luke, want to tell a story while I fix the configuration?
Look over here.
All right, really quick. I just need to do a git checkout.
Yeah, no. Well, this is how you know it's real. This is not a canned demo. There are bumps and things along the way, but this actually is kind of a good time to talk about one of the qualities that I really like about Backdrop is that the lack of complexity, the lack of sort of overbuilt systems that we were kind of touching on briefly comes into play when something goes wrong, because it's like fixing a motorcycle versus fixing, you know, a jet airplane or an aircraft carrier or something. You can open it up and all the pieces are sort of logical. There's not that many places, and turn a couple of nuts, tighten a couple of screws, and you're good to go.
All
Are we good
right,
to go?
we're back.
See?
I tightened the screws.
Nuts, tightened.
All right, so words to the wise, if you're gonna run your demo immediately for your presentation to make sure it works, make sure you get it back into starting state. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the configuration management system in Backdrop, and it'll show you any configuration files that have changed. So the way that I usually do my updates from Drupal to Backdrop is I'll do them once and then I throw it out and I do them again. And so this is the process of doing it again, where I have all of these configurations from the last time. I may have adjusted something after I did my first import, and so all of the changes are here. So if I hit the import all button, it's going to take all of my configuration files that I've previously approved and overwrite them over the ones that generated doing the update. And then if I do a quick flush all caches, I should have a version of my Backdrop site that looks just like my Drupal site. So here's the home page, here's the who we are section, all of the nodes got converted, all of the views should be in here. So let's see, if we go to recipes, this is a view, the blog is a view. The layout on the site is pretty straightforward. I've got a 3-column layout with a sub menu on the left and a quote on the right. The homepage is a different layout, just a 1-column slideshow. But this site is now running Backdrop instead of Drupal. So the actual update is very straightforward. This theme is the theme I had to, take the Drupal theme and modify a little bit. There's one custom module that had to be modified a little bit, but for the most part, the site moved over very quickly. And a lot of the modules that I was using in Drupal are now in core in Backdrop. So there was very little work to do in terms of copying new stuff over, which is great.
Holy cow! I mean, so that was an empty Backdrop site literally 2 minutes ago, and now it's filled with, it's got all the content types, it's got all the content in it, right? Yeah. Can you click on the content menu and we can just show like all these, sure. Hopefully not betraying any confidences.
Yep. So this is all the content, the blog posts that were written by the client, all of the basic pages that were originally set up by me. They're all in here. Just a quick tour around the admin interface. This is the same content listing you would see in Drupal 7, but it's now a view. So if you wanted to add or remove columns, you can do that. It contains like some new options, like being able to search something. The admin bar across the top, this is what used to be admin menu. It's been rewritten as admin bar. We added a couple of new features, like if you're trying to figure out where views is in the user interface, we've got a search that will show you That's now an admin menu, I think, for Drupal 7 also. We added a status indicator. So if there are issues with your website, it'll show a little number here with things that are wrong. And if you click on that, it'll take you to the status report, and it might show you things that need to get changed. Because I ran the update when I was logged out, I had changed a variable in my settings.php file. So here it's telling me I need to change that back. UTF-8 support is what allows you to store emoji in the database.
Let's not worry about the errors. Hold on.
I want to demonstrate this because this is an example of how Backdrop solves a problem in a way that's different than how Drupal would solve it. So
okay, but
Drupal,
throw back to me when you're done with this, because I want to say something.
Okay. So in Drupal, if you wanted to convert your Drupal 7 site to one that allows emoji in the database, the solution to this was a drush command. Drush command is something that is a terminal command intended for developers. And so they're like, hey, there's a problem. Here's the solution. It's for developers. And they put it out as a drush solution. In Backdrop, we wanted to give people the same ability to update their site to use emoji, but because we aren't assuming that everybody's a developer and knows how to use a command line tool, we instead have provided a button in the user interface to do the same thing. So if you want to convert your database tables to allow emoji in Backdrop, we give you a button, and this will go through every database table on your site that allows data storage from end users and clicks them over from one type to the other so that you can enter content. So that was all I wanted to demonstrate, Luke, was just that this tool is intended more for people using the user interface and less for developers using the command line.
Yeah. All right, so can I do the thing now?
Go ahead.
Like you're so close to this. I don't think you realize how remarkable this is. Like here, 5 minutes ago, we were on a dying platform. I don't want to it was good, but it's being shut down. I mean, imagine if the real world was like this, right? Like you're in a house that you've lived in your apartment for the last 10 years. You've got all your stuff around, and suddenly, the landlord is taking over the building and you have to move. So it's like, oh, screw, I'm forced to move. So you rent another apartment in like a town across the way, and then you do an install, and in 3 minutes you're in your new apartment and all your furniture is in place and the bed is made and there's food in the refrigerator and your pictures are hanging on the wall and you've done nothing. Like, how remarkable is that? If only the real world was like that.
Yeah, it's pretty nice, I must say. So for this particular project, I did this upgrade, including the changes to the theme and the custom module, in less than 1 day. Again, it's a very simple website today. It's 15 pages or something plus some blog posts. But the fact that I could do the conversion in less than a day, I think, was good. I think if he had wanted to build a new website in WordPress, it probably would have taken more than a day to get all of the new stuff set up the way he wanted and all the old content moved in. So this was a win for everyone involved.
I mean, most of the work was that you had a custom theme and you had to recreate pieces of that custom thing and new. But
yeah.
But let's say you didn't need that. Let's say you just had an off-the-shelf theme that you wanted to move into. You wouldn't have had to do like all that work, and it wasn't even that much work. But even that little work that you did, you wouldn't have had to do, because most of the stuff, all the content types got changed, all the taxonomies, all the fields, all the modules. It all just worked.
Yep.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, everything got converted. Yeah, so and also all the configurations, the main amount of conversion that's happening during that Drupal to Backdrop update script process is that all of the configuration that was previously stored in the database got stored into flat files instead. And so all the database for Backdrop is going to be significantly smaller than the database for Drupal for this site in particular, because it doesn't have a lot of content. So the majority of the database in Drupal 7 was configuration. So that's also something that is now like reduces the load on his server, right? So if he had a server where he was running a bunch of other stuff and the bulk of the database was his Drupal site, by moving it to Backdrop, he's made more room there, which is kind of exciting. I don't think that's usually a limiter for people anymore these days, but it's something that brings me great joy when I export a Backdrop database and see how tiny it is compared to the Drupal database beforehand.
It not only it is moved, it's improved in the move. It's as if in my previous house analogy, you're in your new house, like all the garbage you had in the garage is now neatly in like little containers, and your clothes are pressed and folded inside of the dressers.
Yep. So let's see, we've got maybe 2 minutes left. I'm not sure there's anyone here who has questions, but maybe we should open it up and see. So if we can maybe unmute everyone.
Hey, this is Chris O'Donnell. I've got a question. And it's
Sure.
probably a very unfair question you can't answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. For a reasonably complex Drupal 7 site, what's like the savings and level of effort from taking it to Backdrop versus trying to get it into Drupal 8? We're talking like 20%, 50%. Do you have any like feel for that amount?
I don't have a lot of experience moving sites to Drupal 8 yet, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer this question. But in terms of upgrading a site from Drupal 7 to Backdrop, the most complicated one I've done took maybe 2 months. And I've heard stories about people planning on migrations to Drupal 8 taking more than a year.
Oh yeah. All the
So I mean, just in terms of like not having to rewrite any custom code, if you have a fairly complex Drupal 7 site, I would imagine it has a fair amount of custom code on it. And that's going to be the thing that'll take you the longest to move to Drupal 8. If you're using entirely contributed modules, it might not be that big a difference because you're not having to rewrite a bunch of custom code, but you are still going to have to handle migrating the data from where it was stored in Drupal 7 to where it's going to be stored in Drupal 8, even if it's the same module, just because that's part of the upgrade process. So in Backdrop, same module, same data storage, no change at all. So it makes that part of the update go a lot faster.
Yeah, there's two things that you're absolutely going to have to do in Drupal 8 that are far easier to do in Backdrop. One is changing the theme. In Drupal 8, you have to use Twig now.
Right.
Sorry.
There's a certain irony to that.
Yes, I realize this.
But as it is, you have to re-engineer the theme, and depending how complicated the theme was in the past, that might be a certain amount of work. You're going to have to recreate all the views. So depending on how many views you use, that's going to have to be re-engineered. But really, the single biggest thing in most sites is probably going to be the custom modules, because most sites include some number of custom modules. And to convert a module from Drupal 7 to Backdrop is a very mechanical process. There's like a checklist thing you can go through, and boom, boom, boom. A good Drupal programmer, a reasonably competent Drupal, or someone better than me, but like a reasonably good Drupal programmer, converts a Drupal 7 module to a Backdrop module in a few hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had one.
I mean that's like a few days or weeks to create. I mean, because Drupal 8 modules are a completely different paradigm. They have to be usually pretty dramatically refactored. So it's the modules that are probably the scariest part about the.
Yeah, so in this
7 upgrade.
upgrade, I had one custom module I had to update. There was also one contributed module that didn't have a Backdrop version. It's this taxonomy formatter module. And in that 1 day of time, I was also able to port the contrib module from Drupal 7 to Backdrop and create its first release for the Backdrop contrib community. So that was baked into the 1 day of upgrade time. That was probably the second longest thing, was the 2 hours I spent updating that module from Drupal 7 to Backdrop. So it is rather trivial. It's mostly like find replace Drupal with Backdrop. Find and replace variable set get with config set get. But yeah, not a lot of brain work involved in importing modules from one system to the other to Backdrop. And in Drupal 8, I know that there's a lot of boilerplate code, which will help you get there. But because everything works really differently in Drupal 8 than it did in Drupal 7, there is a lot of brain work involved in making that conversion.
All right, thanks.
I wish I had a percentage number I could give you. My guess is that it would be like 75% longer to move to Drupal 8. But again, because I don't have a lot of experience moving to Drupal 8, I would recommend that you ask somebody who's done both, at least more extensively, for their feel on number 2. Also, I might be biased because this is moving to Backdrop was very fast for me because I know it really well. So those numbers would probably be different for others.
Yeah, it depends on the old site. Things like you know the basic content will transfer about the same in either system. It's an automatic process. So it's the question of the things that have to be transformed, and all the things that need to be transformed have much less distance to go to get to Backdrop than they do to get to Drupal 8. So views take no time at all in Backdrop and take probably a few hours a piece in Drupal 8 to get them. If you're being kind of optimistic, at the consulting companies that I used to work for, we might have put in 20 or 30 hours for each issue because you work in QA time and things like that. And then similarly, the theme is substantially different. I mean, in Backdrop, the themes are basically the same, except that instead of the page template, use the layout manager. So there's a little reworking there, but it mostly involves like ripping stuff out of the Drupal theme and recreating that in the interface in Backdrop.
That's configuration.
It's kind of a drop-in thing. Whereas, any template.php, I think any like pre-process functions or anything like that you had in your Drupal 7 theme, totally rewritten in Drupal 8, and then the modules is really the big one, because it's just a completely, you have to write a object-oriented Symfony module, which is a whole different structure and paradigm. Some similarities, but basically different. Whereas some Drupal 7 modules transfer. I mean, it depends on what they do, but lots of them transfer trivially. It's just change.
Let's see if there are any other questions. No. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. So we could go on and on about differences, but there might be some other questions.
I was at the end of that anyway.
Okay. Yeah, it is really interesting to have been really involved in the Twig initiative for Drupal 8 and now in the Keep It the Same initiative for Backdrop. And it's interesting because my root goal is the same in both instances. I wanted to make Drupal easier for people to learn. And I felt like Twig as a template engine was much easier for people to learn than starting with PHP template. If you didn't know PHP, if you didn't know HTML, CSS, and you just needed to write a theme, what would you be able to use fastest? But when we started working with Backdrop, we sat down and tried to decide what our principles were at the very beginning. And one of the things that came out of it was that backwards compatibility was important and that we needed to make it as easy as possible for people to move from their current website to an updated version of their current website. And so that meant not changing the theme very much. And so in Backdrop's theme layer, I had to look at it and say, okay, now that I have this to do all over again, how do we make this easier to learn? And so using the layout system, I think is going to prevent some of that weird invisible disappearing regions stuff that happened in the theme system in Drupal 7. It's going to prevent the need to have themes that are just listing like, oh, I'm a 4-column theme, because the columns don't matter. It's whatever you want in any theme. And then in terms of working in the template files, all we did was make the stuff that was hidden in Drupal 7 visible. So like where we take classes and implode them from an array to string, that's now just in the template file instead of being hidden in a process layer. But for the most part, converting from Drupal 7 to Backdrop is still very straightforward. Again, it's like find and replace. If you want to use HTML5, update to HTML5. If you don't, just leave it the same as what you had in Drupal 7. There's also like Drupal 7 heavily used IDs. Backdrop doesn't. If you want your CSS from your old theme to work on new template files from Backdrop, you might want to add an ID to make it map, or update your CSS file to these classes. And that was the biggest time sink for this particular site, was I spent about 2.5 hours updating the CSS to use classes instead of IDs. That was not necessary. I didn't need to do that, but I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and so I wanted it to be more like Backdrop and less like Drupal, so I spent some time doing that. But yeah, I was still able to do the whole thing in less than a day, even though I spent a bunch of time in the CSS files. So, yep.
I just want to point out that when you're doing, migrations to Backdrop, you're talking about hours instead of days and weeks.
Yeah.
So.
And it still feels like it's too much work. So we've got a bunch of open issues in the queue to like make it easier for developers. We have a backwards compatibility layer between Drupal and Backdrop that will log anytime you call a deprecated function, so that you can turn on your module and it'll still work, but then you go check your log and it'll say, by the way, these functions are now replaced by these, and it'll link to the documentation. But it still feels like I would really love it if most of this was automated, if you could not have to do your theme yourself and Backdrop would do it for you. Like that's what I want, end goal. So that's what we're sort of
And
the world I want.
towards that, actually, I want to send out a message to the world that the simplicity is the thing that we really care about. So like if you're having trouble with something, get that message to us in the Backdrop community, and we'll not only help you get your thing done, we'll fix the system so it's not hard for people in the future too. Like we, as it goes on, the plan is for it not to get more complicated. The plan is for it to get simpler and simpler, and until it just disappears and becomes a usable tool that you use for whatever you can imagine.
Yeah. So speaking of getting in touch with the Backdrop community, our website is backdropcms.org. You can find us on Twitter at backdropcms. The project is on GitHub, github.com/backdrop, and we have a chat. So if you just want to jump in and talk with anyone and ask any questions, you can find us on Zulip, backdrop.zulipchat.com. And that's it.
Forums.
I think we're out of time.
Forums.backdropcms.org.
What?
Forums.
Oh yeah, we have a forum if you want to chat with people there too. Forum.backdropcms.org. All right, I think we're out of time. So we will also be in, or at least I'll be in the Slack channel for CMS Philly for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. So how does that end?
I don't know.